Well, hello, Living Streams, and anybody not from Living Streams who's hanging out with us. Welcome to the Living Streams Deep Dive Podcast. I am joined by someone we have missed on the podcast for a little while, none other than David Stockton, our senior pastor.
I've been out.
Yeah, he's been out. He's doing a little bit better. His voice is a lot stronger.
Mm-hmm.
You can, no
I've been out,
growlies.
but not down.
Yeah, not down, and no longer out.
No longer
at least
out.
not on the podcast. David, how have you been doing, man? What's going on?
I've been doing good. I actually went to the doctor today and my endocrinologist, which I never had one of those before.
Uh-huh.
I've heard of the thyroid, but I wouldn't have been able to tell you where it was or what it does before this year, 2025. So I'm good. They said my blood work is trending in the right direction. I got a little low on my calcium,
Okay.
which is okay. Just got to drink more milk, eat more ice cream.
Yeah.
Something like that, maybe.
Ice cream, can't complain about that.
But no, definitely went through about the 6 weeks of what they call the pain stage.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good name. It's a good name for it.
Pain stage.
But I'm at the end of that. And so there's very little pain. I'm not taking any steroid anymore, which is great. It's just the minimal swelling and pressure on my throat. But yeah, my voice was only really bad for 10 days, but yeah, just energy, and I wasn't sure how my voice would do. So, but yeah, it's been good. It's been good. My energy's still up, and
Good. Well,
it's been very minor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's good news.
yeah.
A lot of people.
And you told me that I was doing pretty good with the rage one time.
That's
the
true.
steroid rage.
That's
So
true.
that was good news.
He was like, "What?" Because you didn't realize that was like a steroid thing.
Yeah, no, not rage in particular. But it's funny. I've mentioned that to people, and people have told me they're like, when I was on a steroid, I was so upset all the time.
Yeah.
I was so angry all the time. Yeah, I haven't really had much of that. I could feel the stimulation maybe, where it was just like it was there was like energy that I knew wasn't me.
Yeah.
But it never really turned into anything.
That's good.
I think maybe I'm a little mellow.
You didn't kick any puppies or make anybody cry unnecessarily.
Maybe it just made me
not
more
that I
fun.
saw.
Yeah. My girls actually one time, they were like, is he on the steroids still? Because I was real excited, you know? So maybe it made me more fun or something.
Well, hey, shoot, if that's the takeaway from you on a steroid, then I feel like you can go to those things a little quicker than most people. Because I know my wife, she's had to go on there for ear infections and stuff in the past, and that's the thing that she's like, it just becomes so impossible.
Yeah, I've known people
not to want to murder everyone.
Well, my brother who's ER, he told me, don't do what they tell you to do, which is take it in the morning. They said, because if you take it in the morning, it'll be better for when you have to sleep. He said, that's not true. You take it right before you sleep, and then the full kick in doesn't happen until, you've woken up in the morning. And it was still not perfect, but I did both, and taking it right before I fell asleep. Little life hack there for everyone out there. You could try that and see if it helps.
I've learned over the years that Peter advice is usually good advice. It does you well. Well, this Sunday you helped us kind of fast forward through the end of Joshua, which is good. We didn't have a large geography lesson, which is a bit of a missed opportunity for you, because you like yourself a good timeline usually, but I feel like a geographic map, could be an untapped love of yours.
Yeah.
I haven't seen you do the.
Well, it's funny. Do you remember when I taught Joshua 1,000 years ago in the youth group days?
Probably.
I used to start it out with, first they came to the Jordan River, splish, splash, splish, splash. And then they came to the walls of Jericho. And we did all these things to kind of just put a little sound and action to the whole walkthrough. I didn't do that in Sunday morning, partially because I was dealing with some weakness. I had a few other ideas to do during this series that never really transpired because especially those first couple weeks, I was just trying to do the message and get through that. But yeah, there was a little bit of that. I actually thought about doing Dayenu, a Joshua version of Dayenu, which Dayenu is, it would have been enough, and it's part of the Passover Seder. And they say, if you had brought us out of Egypt and not parted the Red Sea, Dayenu, it would have been enough. If you had parted the Red Sea, but not brought us to Mount Sinai and given us the law. It kind of goes through a different progression like that. And I thought we could do a similar thing, but for the Joshua phase.
Yeah.
If you had parted the Jordan River, but not let the walls come down at Jericho. Dayenu. And I was even going to have like the 4 sections of the church singing the Dayenu song, like Dayenu, 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 kind of do like that. But I didn't do any of that because I was too weak.
Yeah.
I thought, let's just go easy on this. And maybe it would have been too cheesy.
There's we started doing the Passover dinner 3 years ago that we do the Thursday before Easter. And there's a young couple in the family who a few months later said, yeah, we did the Passover dinner and decided that our daughter's middle name would be Dayenu.
No way.
Yeah.
Well, and little bit of a plug, right? Thursday before Easter, which is the 17th, I believe.
That sounds right.
Alec will be leading us, Living Streams, through our Passover Seder in the gym, around tables, with the most delicious food. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You should register for that.
It's a Seder light, because I've basically just stolen what Brittany does.
Yeah, Brittany does a good Seder.
If you've never been to a Brittany dreamed celebration.
I wouldn't call it Seder light. It's maybe it's not a complete Seder, but it's Seder.
Yeah.
There's no light in there. Yeah.
Diet Seder?
Yeah.
No, he's right. That's the wrong word.
It's just there's just a few pieces that aren't in there, maybe because of family.
Maybe a remix.
Yeah, it could be
appropriated.
I mean, I grew up.
Yeah.
Right. I
It's a
grew
Cliff
up
Notes
appropriated.
version.
Yeah.
What else are we gonna?
I grew up doing a lot of Seders because my dad was big in like the Messianic world, and my memory of Seders was like really cool for about 5 minutes as a kid, and then I want to get out of here. Like probably as an adult, a little more cool. So I know that is like one of the cardinal sins in Brittany's world is boring people and boring children,
for sure.
And when we decided to do that, I just really wanted to lean into that. Like, this needs to be Passover's, and I think I'd heard Brittany articulate this, and it just resonated so true. Passover is meant to be for teaching your kids.
Yeah, should be fun for the kids.
It's a holiday, and so it should be fun for kids. And so I when I designed it, largely based off of what I'd seen Brittany do. I just thought, I just got to do everything I can to have this be, fruitful for adults, but like a win for the kids.
Yeah, no,
too.
Last year was the first one I got to go to because we were in Ireland before that. And it was fun. It was lighthearted. I actually sat at a table with all kids. Yeah. Which maybe was even more fun.
Good.
But it was great.
Yeah, I love it.
And actually in Joshua, that is one of the things before they went into the actual promised land. Yeah. They consecrated themselves by 2 things. One, they circumcised all the males. Yeah. Not as cool. Yeah. And then they held Passover. Yeah. Which is kind of cool. Right there at the beginning of Joshua is like they did Passover to kind of prepare their hearts to go into the land and remember all that the Lord has done.
Yeah, because it says, right, that they hadn't been able to. Or is that just the circumcision? Yeah. Was it also the Passover they hadn't been able to while they were traveling? Yeah. I know it says that the circumcision, it's like, when you're picking up and moving every couple of days.
Well, when you're about to go to war is not a great time.
Yeah.
Either, no, it was, I think part of the forgotten and kind of the stuff that fade to the background. But Joshua was saying, let's bring all the important stuff right back to the forefront. And they did a Passover there.
It's interesting if you take a close enough look at like the history of Israel in regards to some of those things that God calls the people of Israel to do. You realize that their adherence, not just to like the moral stuff, but even to like the systematic things and the feasts and celebrations is splotchy at best. There's not, you can kind of reverse engineer it, right? But the Sabbath years and the year of Jubilee, we don't really have any notable examples in the Old Testament of the people of Israel doing that. We can probably look at some of the prophetic stuff. We can assume that they actually did do it, but we have 490 years if you add up. By the time we get to the exile, if you add up the years that Israel and the years that Judah didn't adhere to the Sabbath years, 490 instances of those 2 nations ignoring God's call there. So I don't know. It's just interesting that you see a little snippet of that already at the beginning of Joshua. It's like, hey, like we literally just started this covenant thing with God on Mount Zion, and here we are 40 years later, and it's the 41st years of this covenant, and we haven't been adhering to it well already. But then it's interesting too, because the Lord's pretty clear in the book of Joshua about the things he's got a problem with.
What's the word post-Christian, right? Comes to mind, where how can a society become post something? And what you're describing, Israel did after Joshua. I mean, Joshua really got people on track, and even said at the end of Joshua, he's like, I know you guys aren't going to stay on track, but within however many years, 490 potentially, since Joshua, it's like they were so post Passover, they were so post Judaism, they were so post Moses at that point. And it wasn't that there wasn't some remnant of, I mean, obviously the temple was still there, and the temple was still there, 490 years later.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about in Joshua.
The temple was there, but there was actually more worship of Baal going on even in the temple than there was of Yahweh. So it's like they never got completely rid of it, but it had completely flipped by the time the exile happens, where God says, now forget it. You've forgotten about me. You've forgotten about my Sabbath, and I'm going to actually require that of you. And just thinking about, our world, I mean, living in Ireland that year, the craziest thing that all the missionaries or anybody that was Christian in Ireland, they just said, I never thought I would see the day where Ireland is post-Christian. Like the majority of the people now either don't know or don't care, or actually against any kind of rise of Christianity. And I remember talking to actually the Young Life missionary guy. I think you knew him as well, but
Chris.
He's a little bit older, and he just was saying, I'd never thought I'd see the day that our youth have never heard the gospel of Jesus here in Ireland, because it became post. And then I know for us in America, that's one of the big questions: are we post-Christian? I mean, I think there's probably people who've become post-Christian, but
for sure.
As a nation, I think there's a wrestling match going on. I don't think we are post-Christian. I think there's a wrestling match. I think through 2020 and some of the pressures going on there, I think that was as close to the flip as we'd ever gotten from really just kind of an all-out, rebellion against. But then there's been this weird resurgence, and it's like the younger generation, and maybe the I mean, it's hard to say this, but like the true church or whatever, the confessing church, to borrow from Bonhoeffer, has emerged actually pretty strong still in our country. Now, a lot of, I think, probably confusing church or church that has confused or compromised. A lot of that was washed away, but that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's a hard thing, but so it's interesting to think about all those things. But in Joshua's day, they were red hot,
When it's worth saying too, I know you're just trying to tie it back to Joshua, but I think it's worth talking about that a little bit more too. Because one of the things that people say is like, oh, like, what's the phrase? I don't hear anybody say it in our circles, honestly, but I know it happens in the church where it's like, oh, you left us because you were never of us in the first place.
Explain that a little bit.
I think, to some extent, maybe we're talking a little bit Calvinist, a little bit like predetermination.
The reason you've gone away from the Lord is because you never really were with the Lord.
Yeah, exactly. It was all false. But I mean, I know enough people who really have known Jesus, who've walked away, to know that that's just like that's trying to make your circumstances fit your understanding
theology
of the world. Fit your theology, as where it's like, it could be that there's actually something off in your theology there, that someone can know Jesus and then reject Jesus.
Like in Hebrews 6, I think it is, or 8.
And I think oftentimes part of what leads to rejecting Jesus is is bad theology, is not knowing right things about Jesus. But everybody has wrong things about Jesus. And at the same time, I think, I'm sure that there are people who have known Jesus quite well. I mean, Adam and Eve walking in the garden, with God, still rejecting him and thinking maybe I can do better. Certainly the spiritual rebellion of the rebellion of spiritual beings who presumably understand God better than we do in some ways. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true, I don't know. But Satan, probably had his mind wrapped around God pretty well, and as well as a being might, and rejected God. So I think you can know God and reject God, and I think maybe that's part of why, people ask like, oh, why can't God just like show himself clear, like tangibly manifest, show up here, poke me in the face? Never mind the fact that he did that 2,000 years ago. But I think part of it is because it wouldn't make a difference.
Jesus did that parable where rich man and Lazarus, and that was the conclusion, was even if somebody rose from the dead, you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
Even if the rich man was able to be brought back, your family wouldn't believe. Yeah. And that in some ways you're saying like Jesus rose from the dead, you either believe or you don't.
Yeah.
He did it. He did that once and for all.
Yeah.
But you're talking about Hebrews 6:4 says it's impossible for those who have once been enlightened, who have tasted the heavenly gift, who have shared in the Holy Spirit, who have tasted the goodness of the Word of God and the powers of the coming age, and who have fallen away to be brought back to repentance. So not trying to say anything more on that verse, but describing what you said where, these people definitely, shared in the Holy Spirit. There you go. That's pretty good. To have fallen away. So at least there's a challenge there. Yeah. Yeah. There's a challenge.
Yeah. There. That's a whole, there's a whole other podcast and sermon, I think on that, but we're watching it.
What we can do, all we can do is like Joshua said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And that old Christian song, though none will follow, still I will go, like the cross before me, I will follow.
I remember you used to, speaking of when you were the youth pastor, you used to really, I don't remember how you said it, and maybe it was just one sermon series, but I think it was a refrain that you revisited often, but something to the effect of, well, if no one else is going to follow Jesus, am I still going to follow Jesus? I don't know if you remember that or how you phrased that, but,
I don't,
but you said it often enough. It was something I think that was sticking for a lot of us. And I think that's a really meaningful thing to wrestle with. Like, what if no one else?
Yeah.
And to some extent, that's a little bit of maybe what that resurgence that you're talking about has happened is we saw a lot of people fall off. A lot of people reject Jesus. And then a lot of people had to say, well, it's not cool anymore. Yep. There was
a cost.
And that's what you were getting at back then when I was in high school was like, hey, there's some currents in the world around you that actually will push you to follow in Jesus. But those tides have changed largely. Not that they're non-existent, but they've largely changed in our society to the point where you're swimming upstream in a lot of ways if you're following Jesus. Like there's not a lot of social clout that you get from following Jesus, which was crazy. I remember watching, and again, like you said, so much of it happened in 2020 where all of a sudden, I remember being told, being insulted pretty nasty from some people, being called a bigot for saying like, hey, Jesus calls us to forgive people, regardless of what side of the aisle the offense is taking place on or whatever. And that's a simplification of the conversation, but being met with, oh, I think you're probably a white supremacist. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was from someone very close to me, saying that.
Well, no, there was a lot of people who lost friends. Living Streams, we had an elder in our church just eventually get to the point where he felt like we were being too intense. We were not, shifting enough in that time, and really great guy, and it was and a friend of mine too. So it was very hard to say, well, I actually think we're on track and we're within the scriptures and we're doing it with grace at the same time. And so there was a cutting, which was really, really hard. And that's part of it, where you said there isn't a gain of social clout. And I think that's for a lot of time in America, it's just like you either gain as a Christian or now you're not gaining as a Christian.
Yeah.
But I think we got the first touch, and still not intense, of cost.
Yeah.
Where now it's not you're not going to gain something, but now you're actually going to lose something.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to lose a friend. You're going to lose a family member.
Yeah.
If you continue to hold tight to Jesus.
Might not get this job.
You're going to you're going to lose a job or not get the job. That definitely, that was there for a little bit, and it seems to have subsided. But you can look at many different cultures or countries around the world where to follow Jesus, it costs you everything.
Yeah.
And then there's been times, even in Christian nations like Germany or whatever, where to follow Jesus, it could cost you your life. And those are some wild things. And most likely, based on human history, there will be a time in the USA, Lord willing, it won't, but based just on history, without the grace of God or intervention of the Spirit, there will be a time in our country where there is some sort of decline that leads to a great cost of following Jesus. And pray that God will be merciful at that time. And we will, like Joshua, as for me and my house, we're going to keep hot.
Yeah. And the book of Joshua has this theme, right, of obeying the Lord in the midst of disobedience, of wholly following the Lord in the midst of largely not following the Lord. And it's so interesting to see. It's like the book of Joshua is calling us to consider and to chew on and to wrestle with the Lord with the reality of his mercy and the fact that he's always calling us forward from where we are, even that there isn't a point at which he says, look, you just messed up too much. That's it. You're done. He doesn't do that. He's calling them to holiness and willing to keep coming back with them. Like I watched this YouTube video from this very silly guy who just does these, just a Gen Z YouTuber, right? Who like,
he's a silly guy.
Yeah. Huh? Let's do something stupid and make it feel epic,
Okay.
And this guy's just trying to like, his dumb thing is it's like, I want to cross like an abandoned train bridge, right? And so he's done a number of different little videos of that. And so his last one, he's got this big one in Idaho that he's wanting to do or whatever. And so he gets this little Japanese mini truck and tries to build his own. Have you ever seen those trucks that have like the rails, like when they do like railroad service, you know? Sure. So he tries to build his own ones of those, and they're all janky because he's like 23 years old and is not like a mechanic. He's just a YouTube kid, And so he's going through the whole process.
Or a silly guy.
Yeah, he's definitely a silly guy. He's just a very doofy human being. And so he's just making an epic kind of story of this and to kind of to the absurd, right? And but so he's like, what he builds is not great. It's maybe good enough. And so the result is he gets it up on those rail tracks, and every time there's like a turn or a rock or whatever, it's like ka-chunk and falls right off. But this guy's pretty dedicated to this ridiculous goal of his, right? So like it falls off the tracks, and then he spends like 15, 20 minutes every time trying to get it back on. It's not easy to get it back on there.
Right, probably heavy. But
he continues to do that. And because he has a goal he's moving towards. And I think to some extent that's a little bit, like I'm thinking about that in this conversation, because it's kind of like that's what the book of Joshua is saying. It's like God has this goal for us, for the people of Israel here, being on this track, going to the promised land, wholly following his covenant, being faithful to the Lord, taking possession of the full inheritance. And they just keep falling off the tracks. But
not in Joshua's day, though.
Well, a little bit, not
with
fully
Achan?
falling off. Yeah, Achan, argument with the yeah, but you're right. Like they're getting back on it.
That's what I love about the book of Joshua.
Yeah.
Is it's like Joshua somehow, and obviously it's the Lord, but the Lord used Joshua to create such a gravity.
Yeah.
That just pulled the whole nation into following the Lord. Now, whether or not
Book of Joshua,
whether or not they were wholehearted is a question on an individual basis. But even if they were not wholehearted, they were, even the 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, or what is it? Half tribe of Gad. So Manasseh, Reuben, and half tribe of Gad. They were outside. Mm-hmm. They wanted to stay outside the promised land on east of the Jordan. And Joshua was like, hey, but you got to do what Moses said. You got to come in and fight with us. Then you can go back afterwards. Even they got pulled in. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is wishful thinking or whatever, but I just love that the promise to Joshua was, you will cause all these people to inherit the land. And so it's like, if I can run hard enough, if I can be bold enough or strong enough and courageous enough, if I can be filled with the Spirit enough, if I can run this race, whether it's inspiring, whether it's just setting an example for, like somehow my little puny life can actually pull. Yeah, it can pull people into this thing, and I don't know. I love that idea from the book of Joshua, and for that whole, and Joshua 24, 23, kind of the conclusion there is Joshua's going, look, I'm getting old. I'm about to go the way of all the earth, or well advanced in years, he said. And he's calling them, he's saying, look, I can't pull you anymore. I'm not going to be like the tip of the spear anymore. Yeah. I'm going to be gone, and you have to choose this day to be the one for your own family, be the one for your own tribe, be the one for your own like kids, or be the one for the next generation. Like you have to run and chase and fight and hunger and do all this. And if you do, you can pull. You can pull people in. And it's like good peer pressure. Yeah. Where peer pressure doesn't have to be bad. Yeah. And I don't know, I love that idea. Yeah. And then Judges, obviously, it gets real wanky, where there's somebody there that pulls them, and then as soon as that person's gone, they go off the rails and those things. But I do love that about Joshua.
Well, and I mean, I think what you're saying and what I'm saying, they sound in contradiction a little bit, but they don't. Because the book of Joshua, you're right, like he is creating a gravity
in that little,
and that does continue in the book of Judges. At the same time, and there is like, I think the book of Joshua has this major theme of like these two seemingly contradictory realities that are happening at the same time. The people of Israel wholly following the Lord and not. Because it says like, oh, and they like, and they conquered all that the Lord had for them or something like that. And then it tells you about all that they didn't conquer.
They didn't drive out.
And there are examples like, exactly, like they didn't do this, they didn't do that, they didn't do this, they did do, they did mess up here, they did mess up there. And yet at the same time, like Joshua in his faithfulness and Caleb in his faithfulness pulled the people of Israel into a faithfulness to the Lord. And I think that's part of the message of the book of Joshua, is that faithfulness to the Lord. It would be wonderful if it looked like faithfulness, but faithfulness to the Lord looks like real life faithfulness, which means falling off the tracks and then spending time getting back on the tracks and falling off the tracks and it'd be great if it was always on the tracks, and it could be, and yet somehow it never is. But great news for us, like our God doesn't just ditch us when we ditch him. And he doesn't just condemn us when we've deserved it. Like you see that in Joshua just as much as you see it in another Yeshua, in Jesus.
I love so the time that's clear in the book of Joshua where things got off track. It wasn't because of Joshua, it was because of Achan, right? Yeah. Achan had after Jericho kept some of the things that God said, those are devoted to me. You're not to touch those. And he kept some of those for himself. And they went to war and, actually lost for the first time and were driven back. And what I do love about that too is Joshua was so upset. Yeah. He was like, Lord, what is the deal? It's all going to, and it seems a little dramatic. He's like, now they're going to come wipe us out. Their hearts are going to be strengthened. Our hearts are melting with. But what I see in that is a sensitivity to where even though this was just one, like I think they lost 31 people or something, which again, those are people, and some of them might have been Joshua's friends and all these type of things. And as a leader, you feel the weight of all of that. But still, it was like the way he was responding, it was as if, we are in the ditch. We've fallen off the bridge. We're all the way down. And God says to him, Joshua, you just have to deal with this sin that's in the camp.
Yeah.
And then you're right back on track. But I loved the sensitivity of Joshua's heart there.
Yeah.
It's like a man after God's own heart, just like David, where I feel like Joshua, if there was anything wrong between him and God, it was the end of the world.
Yeah.
He couldn't function anymore. He couldn't handle it. And I've prayed that the Lord would do that to me, which is a scary prayer to pray.
Yeah.
Because, that conviction can come so strong and you can lose a lot of sleep until you make things right. But I've had instances where, I just all of a sudden it wasn't even that big a deal, but it just gripped my heart. Like I cannot function until I go and say sorry to this person or make this thing right, even if that person probably doesn't even think it's that big a deal.
Yeah,
I've always wanted to have that very, very sensitive conscience. I actually learned that from Phil Buckley growing up watching him. He's always had extremely sensitive conscience. And as a young person, you get made fun of when you're like that. And it's like you don't have any fun. But at the same time, I think it keeps you from getting very far off track, because you can get back on track a lot quicker. Small embarrassments, right? Like I seek small embarrassments. And so I don't have to deal with big, huge ones. Yeah. So there's just a constant refreshing, a constant checking back with the Lord, a constant cleansing. I mean, even with your wife, like keep short accounts. Yeah. Don't let things just fester and fester, but figure things out little by little. And then I love that Joshua just seems to do that with the Lord. Yeah. He doesn't want to go one day or anything, where he's not totally dialed in with the Lord. And you catch that in David's heart for a long time till that seems to fade away, at least with his family a little bit later on, King David. But that sensitivity to the Lord. And I think some of what I was hoping would happen this last Sunday is we called people forward to come and kneel before the Lord and have him burn away the wax, like sincerity, meaning sin and Sarah in the Latin, without wax. Yeah. So nothing fake, nothing fraudulent, just pure. Was that the Lord would burn away the wax, but also just give us that like heightened sensitivity to his Spirit, to where we would know the minute we're going off track, we would feel it in our bones. Yeah. And the Lord would give us that gift to keep us right on track. I don't know. I see that in Joshua.
Yeah, I had I don't know. It's a profound biblical truth, but maybe there's a little something there when you were talking about that. I was thinking about my understanding of that, right, is it comes actually from vessels, right? Like, so if you have pottery and there's a crack in it, which is pretty common, we see it less often these days in these like industrial pottery, but one of my things that I've been into in the past is pottery and actually making vessels. So our dishes at home.
What was your company called?
Vagabond Pottery. That's what I called it. So our dishes at home are all like handmade dishes and stuff. And over time, you get these little hairline fractures in them. You get these little chips. Probably like 30% of our sets have.
Once you fire them.
Yes, it happens definitely when you're in the process. There's a certain waste that you have to. Like if someone ordered a dish set of 8 bowls, plates, whatever, I would make 10 or 11, just expecting that you're going to lose 2 or 3. But then just the actual use, like the stuff we use now is this like crazy industrial stuff that only breaks if you drop it, right?
Or your kids drop it.
Yeah.
My kids always drop it.
But handmade stuff, like it just setting it down. The dishwasher will get it, getting hot, getting cold. Yep. Just getting plates stacked, you get chips and cracks and stuff. And so I have plenty of that habit. One of the tricks that a potter knows, and would have been probably common knowledge back in the day when everybody was using pottery like that, is for like a vase or a bowl or something like that. If it has a crack in it, you can't always see that crack. It can be a hairline crack. But and one of the things that they would do is if it had a crack that was prominent enough or a chip, right, they'd cover it over with wax like you were talking about, so you can't see it. And that makes it like, okay, cool, like you know, that's still functional, you know. But if you want to check, you can actually flick it. And if it rings like you're used to hearing a glass or a cup or a vase ring, then it would be sincere, right? It wouldn't have any cracks. If it doesn't ring, if it thuds, right, then you know that it's not what it appears to be. And I think that's interesting that I think, you know, when Jesus says like out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. There's something about like when you look at someone, you can't always see what's going on. But if you are paying close enough attention, sometimes it does come out in their voice and their words. Yeah, if you flick them.
if you flick them, you're going to find out.
The sound they make. Yeah,
you're going to find out what their anger level is.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny because you're joking about that, but even like, I think it's worth saying for you, you know, you put them on steroids or something really unique that, you know, and that's kind of, I think what I was trying to say to you when I was telling you, oh, you've been doing great with the rage, is like, you're fighting a thing, but it says something that in your heart, even with something stoking those fires, for you it was just feeling like a little bit of like more vulnerable, but not actually manifesting in. Well,
it felt like maybe there was a little crazy in there, so maybe I got a little crazy.
Yeah,
so like there was a little crazy. Like I could feel this, like just like push to kind of be a little more wild, or like just and it was easy to restrain like that. But I think the only time I ever saw it was my girls. Every once in a while I would notice like, what's going on with Dad? Why is he so excited? Or why is he so talkative or something, which is kind of funny. I
almost am even wondering, like, I wonder if that's one of those benefits that the Lord knows in fasting, or you're pushing yourself to, like, I mean, I would say, I guess I experience that. I've been fasting regularly for medical stuff lately. And it's like yesterday I was fasting and I had my baby at home, and it was a long meeting day, right? You were on a couple meetings with me, big like 2-hour meetings, and like I'm just on the phone, you know, and I'm chiming in when I can and listening. But, you know, fortunately, since it wasn't video call, you guys didn't see me. I got a baby I'm juggling, you know, and I was fasting, and it was exhausting, you know, and I got to the end of the day and I'm like, I'm making dinner, because I was fasting from dinner to dinner, you know? Yeah. And like, just as my wife and my older son are coming home, I'm like I can feel fighting back the grumpy, and it's revealing. It's kind of like flicking that vase a little bit, like you're saying, you know, maybe there's something to the flick, is it's like what's actually in there.
And I didn't say this on Sunday. I mean, the examples of the people in our church, Dr. Jim Everett and Alan and Polly Heller, who are just awesome individuals who have been really, really stripped by a medical illness, and are living year after year after year. It's not like me. Like, I had this thing hit me, caused me some grief, you know, pretty intense for a little while, but that subsided, and now it's been minor for the most part and manageable with medicine, like a steroid. But they've been through years of just losing on the physical reality thing, and yet they're hanging tight to Jesus. Yeah. And I didn't put these two things together for everyone on Sunday, except for with the example. But one of the best ways for God to remove the wax from our lives is suffering. And that really, we'll never be able to parse that out correctly until we're in heaven, not seeing through the glass dimly, but seeing clarity with face to face. But between now and then, you know, in some ways, to want sincere faith may be to want some suffering. Yeah. When Jesus said, "If any man come after me, he has to take up his cross and follow me." Jesus was saying, "Come and die," right? Jesus was saying, "Come and suffer, and see suffering in a different light." Yeah. And know that I will be with you in the suffering, to where suffering won't even feel like suffering because of the comfort and peace and joy you find in me. So what used to just feel like suffering and agony can now feel comfortable because the Comforter can make you comfortable in things that you would never have been comfortable before. Yeah. So there's a little mystery in that. Now, the Lord can get rid of the wax in other ways as well, I think, but that definitely is one of the ways that He can remove the wax from our lives. And so fasting, it's like I'm practicing some suffering so that a little more of the wax maybe can be burned out of my life. And I mean, you said medical reasons, so that there's another reality there where, I mean, medically speaking, it does seem like fasting even helps out in that area.
And that's blowing my mind,
not just
right?
spiritual, but
because like 10 years ago, I generally assume that the things that the Lord is telling us are healthy are valuable, are good, that they're right when it comes to the mind, the soul, and the spirit and all that. I'm shocked to see like
the science on
the wealth of, because the Bible's never saying like fast because it's good for your body.
Yeah, it's fast, but it's because it'll get rid of a lot of dead
all
cells.
This time, God was like, "Hey, let me bake in a little blessing that nobody even knows," and now we're figuring out, shoot, like that's so interesting.
Yeah, the commands of the Lord are good.
Then they are full of blessing,
better than we
seen and unseen, known and unknown.
Sometimes it feels so rough.
Yeah.
They're
even
good.
Like you're talking about suffering, like one of those hard but rich truths that I've not wrestled with as a reality in a significant way, in notable ways, but not like the people you're talking about, Alan or Polly or Jim or countless others.
Yeah,
there is also this element of like you've been deemed worthy somehow to share in the sufferings of Christ in a unique way.
A fellowship of suffering, the Bible says. Yeah.
It's funny. I didn't. I was chatting with Jim the other week, and I have never actually talked to Jim before, even though he's been around for a long time. So that was our first interaction. I didn't even realize I know Jim by the name, but I didn't know that was the Jim I was chatting with. So it was interesting. And we had a really rich conversation that Sunday. And that was one of the things I felt like the Lord was telling me to encourage him, and which he was so clearly leaning into is, hey, there's a whole complex mess of things going on here, but one of them is that the Lord sees that you're worthy to share in his suffering. And that's for 2,000 years, believers who have suffered have heard that and leaned into that, and I think know that in a way that those of us who haven't deeply suffered can only begin to smell a little bit. But there's a richness. Then you see some people living in some deep suffering.
Yeah,
Jesus.
And that's this First Peter. I think it's First Peter, might be Second Peter, but the whole, having your faith refined in the fire 7 times is more pure than gold. Like. Just Peter understood that our faith needs to be refined. Yeah. And the sincerity that we talked about last Sunday, it takes refinement. And that's some of the practices that we do and we bring into our life, like the study of the scriptures, being in community, that'll refine you like that. Marriage, that'll refine you right up. Family, that'll refine you right up. Staying in those things will bring about refining. You said fasting. I mean, there's all these spiritual practices that the church has brought in to say, hey, this is a refining. And some of them are minor as far as the amount of like sacrifice and pain. And some of them are more enjoyable than others, upstream, downstream. But yeah, I think those practices can bring refining in us, but also life, the fact that death exists and it's only a matter of time till you're face to face with it. Yeah. Again, death is such a horror for humanity, but I just think if we could see the full perspective, death is just another refining reality. I mean, death is actually a doorway into the real. Yeah. For those who are following Christ. And so suffering just looks so differently. Yeah. And I think this is where there's a difference between Jesus teaching us how to view suffering and maybe we're like Buddha tries to teach us to like escape suffering, like transcend suffering, so that you never suffer anymore. But again, I think that's just more of like a dissociation.
Yeah.
And what Jesus is saying is, hey, like the richness of what you will find in me is not worthy to be compared with the light and momentary suffering, like Paul says. Like I have something for you that even in suffering, you don't have to escape, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's like in the fire, they're not burned.
Yeah.
And actually the only thing that's burned is what was binding them.
Yeah.
And then, they didn't, the king had to say, will you come out of there?
Yeah.
Because Jesus was there. There was a fourth person. Jesus was in there. And all of a sudden the place of burning and suffering and misery just became a place where it was like, this is okay because Jesus was there.
Yeah.
And that's the whole Christian premise along those lines.
Yeah.
And that's New Testament really helping us out with some of the Old Testament.
Zooming in on one thing you said in there, I just, because we're getting ready to do a marriage series coming up soon. We're ready to spill the beans on that, a little post-Easter. Going to spend some time talking about marriage and marriage in a way that applies whether or not you're married, whether or not you have been married.
Yeah, we're going to teach the Bible.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
and that applies.
As long as the Bible's okay with you getting taught the Bible, you're going to love the marriage series.
But I've been reading a couple of books, and one of them was Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. I can't remember his last name, but
sounds good.
It's a good book.
Thompson.
I'm
just making that up to make it sound like I know what I'm talking
Gary
about.
something. I noticed a lot of marriage books by Garys.
Oh yeah. 5 love languages, Gary.
Yeah.
Chapman
Bunch of Gary. Apparently Garys know a thing or two about marriage, but
marry a guy named Gary.
But one of the things, unless you want him to write a book about your marriage,
might be scary to marry a guy named Gary.
There you go. But he was talking about exactly that, the suffering in marriage, and with all the necessary good and valuable, nuances of things. But, he's talking about our culture teaches us about what we should get out of a marriage, right? But really, and a big part of the premise of his book is like one of the primary, if not the primary purpose of marriage is to make you and your spouse holy. And I think most people in a marriage have had a moment in time, interestingly enough, probably the same moment their spouse feels the same way, where you feel like I'm putting more in than I'm getting out. And some marriages are genuinely lopsided in that way, right? Some marriages and it may just be because your spouse is selfish, right? But of course it could be because maybe your spouse is medically challenged or something like that, something's going on, right? But when you find yourself in a marriage where it's not equal in some regards, like our culture tells us to fight to make it equal or to dip out of there. But he's saying, what if one of the things God is wanting to accomplish in that, or at least one of the things God can accomplish in that, is to make you more like Jesus, to make you more holy, to make you more of a servant. And he says, now the flip side is part of marriage is one of the ways you can serve your spouse is to help make them more holy, which might mean talking to them about them learning to serve a little bit too. But, and of course that could be abused really easily in a nasty kind of unhealthy, abusive marriage. But that's one thing for a lot of us, I think, to consider. I wanted to ask though, David, you covered a large swath in this last sermon, and did that. You had a hit a nugget here, hit a nugget there. You had some really powerful thoughts. I wish we had a little more time to chat about like the Levites and Joseph's bones, but I think you hit those, I think, in a really good, succinct way. And we already kind of talked about the sincerity, but you probably chopped one or two things. I think you had said earlier to me, had mentioned at least one thing you chopped. So
so it's 10 chapters because your teaching took us to. Did you do one verse in 14 or one verse in 15? One verse in 15.
Yeah.
So then it really went 10 chapters to get us to 24, and really just focused on 23 and 24, because it's just a lot of and this land was from this place to this place to this place to this place, some borders was given to this tribe and this family and this family and this family and this family and this family, and so there's a lot of that in there. So we zoomed through, but one of the things that I cut was this whole idea of triumph and rest, and the idea that the Lord brought victory to Joshua and the people in the promised land at great cost to the Canaanites, the people that were there. And we talked through a lot of those reasons throughout the sermon series. But the Lord brought the Lord brought victory to the people of Israel, which brought rest to the land. And I just thought there was something really important there where how do you know when it's the Lord that has brought about victory and not maybe your own strength or your own wisdom? And I think the victory of the Lord always does bring about rest for the land. Whereas the victory that we get in the world based on our own strength or wisdom or whatever the world gives is it doesn't bring about rest. It doesn't bring about shalom, right? It brings about a need to get more, or it brings about, a need to protect it now at all costs, or it brings about a jealousy, or it brings about a pride. There's all these things that I think the victories we get in our own strength or wisdom, they don't produce that. But I just thought that little subtlety of how do you know it's the Lord bringing victory? Because it actually brings a peace, it brings a rest along with it, and yeah. So that was big, and I think we want the Lord to be the one that's leading us into victory and into triumph and all of those things, and if we grab more than we're supposed to grab, it's not going to bring about the rest of God, right? The land that we take, the victory that we get, the promises that are fulfilled, the fight that we're doing is we're laboring into rest. We're not laboring into, and so if you're laboring into something and you're gaining all this stuff, but it's not creating rest for your soul, if it's not creating rest for your family's soul, if it's not creating rest for your workplace, if it's not creating rest in all of those areas, you might be more along the lines of gaining the whole world, but losing your soul, like Jesus talked about, instead of, actually experiencing abide in me and you will bear much fruit, right? So like all the victory that Jesus was talking about, all the much fruit that was supposed to come comes from abiding and leads back to abiding instead of striving. And you look at Jesus's life. I mean, Jesus had a big job and he accomplished the hardest things in the most beautiful way. You just don't see striving. Yeah. You see abiding and you see the victory that he brought, the things that he did, they always brought rest. And I don't know, that just seemed like a little, especially for our American mindset and our, we got to build the biggest, the best church. We got to build something that, yes, is victorious, is triumph, is conquering, is pulling everybody into the ways of God. But ultimately, the result should be, and the measure should be, it's bringing about the peace of God, the shalom of God. I mean, that's why the Canaanites, that's why God was expelling them from the land, is because they were not bringing about shalom. They were bringing about idolatry and wickedness and horrible things for the youth, the young. And so God was using the Israelites as a punishing rod, as a way to cleanse the land that ultimately brings hopefully the land to rest. And this is just a shot out of the dark here, but my prayer, and please hear what I'm saying here, and please feel free to respond to Alec as much as you want based on this. But there's an idea that our president and his administration right now is trying to bring some cleansing to government corruption or whatever corruption that they see. And I think one of the tests that we as believers can really look at is if they're actually doing it right or not. It should lead to peace and rest throughout the land. And that's one of the challenges with President Trump, is I think even if he's trying to do the right thing, sometimes his mouth creates the opposite of rest or peace. And so that's what, like, it's just been, I mean, it's only been 2 months or 2.5 months or whatever of this administration, but that's my prayer. It's like, Lord, whatever's done, I pray that you would guide them, you would lead them, just like any leader, to do the work and to measure it. And for us, that's one of our ways we can measure, is this producing the peace of God, the rest of God in the land, or is it producing something else?
Yeah.
And if it's producing something else, then I think we need to be leery of it as followers of Christ.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, a little bit of whatever out there.
Yeah, no,
didn't have time for that.
Well, I as you were talking, I was just thinking it's almost like the difference between like kind of that archetypal, monotonous, meaningless, menial work, just the guy on the assembly line just doing the same thing, or the guy who hates spreadsheets, whose job is spreadsheets, or for me, answering emails. Sometimes some people's emails are nice emails, but most of my emails are just emails, boxes to check, right? Versus like gardening and yard work, which is a double whammy for me because I enjoy that. But like at the end of that work, you have peace, right? So like I got this section of my backyard that when we bought the place, it was like pavers and this old yucky gravel that was full of dirt and weeds and then a bunch of Bermuda grass that was growing up all weird. And it just was an ugly chunk of the yard, And over the last few months, as the weather's been nice, like I pulled out all those rock beds. I pulled out I didn't pull out the weeds. I cut them down and I laid cardboard on top of them and I redid the pavers and I dumped compost and wood chips, yards and yards of wood chips, like just a huge amount of them on top of it, and put in a little irrigation system back there, drip lines and stuff. And now I got this little bench and we go back there, and that's like the part of the backyard that we all gravitate to, and we sit and we enjoy it. It's like 2 or 3 degrees cooler over there. There's rest. There's peace over there. There's a lot of work that went into it, but it was good work. And the result, like you're saying, was rest, and it involved getting rid of a lot of stuff, and it involved, conquering some things. And it's very different from the rat race, right? Because it ends, like you said, in a rest. And I think that's a really good point, is I think when the Lord is moving, it does result in that. And if you can think of the experience of yard work, or like, for most of us, we've mowed a lawn at some point. Not everybody's weird like you and me and enjoys mowing a lawn, but there's enough middle-aged dads out there who enjoy mowing the lawn to get what I'm saying. You mow the lawn and you're done, and there's a rest and an enjoyment and an appreciation. I think you're right. And really what that is in a spiritual sense is it's the result of righteousness. What you're pointing to Jesus, when he does something, it results in rest because he's righteous. And the Canaanites, there was no rest in the land because there was unrighteousness. And when you're living in an unrighteous way, when you're not living in accordance with the ways of God, it doesn't matter what you do or how hard you work. It's a rat race, or I think of like, the Gales Point believes that things have gotten a lot better in a lot of ways. But like one of the things that is so frustrating, actually, I remember you guys doing exactly this. You guys planted a garden when you lived in the village, right? And how much of that garden did you eat? Like nothing, pretty much, right? Because unfortunately, there was a lot of unrighteousness. People were coming into your yard.
There's an unrighteous horse too.
Yeah.
But
there's a horse, and there were people coming stealing.
There was one guy in particular who used to bring us. Every once in a while he'd bring us a little bag of veggies. And we realized that he took all the veggies and he would bring us a little bag to say, "Hey, look what I brought you." We thought he was bringing them from his farm. He was bringing them from our own from our own garden.
Yeah. And like one of the challenges in that village, right, is like the minute you get something good, somebody steals it or breaks it. And so it's so much more work trying to build there because of some unrighteousness. And fortunately for a lot of people, they put a lot of work, a lot of the Lord's work, and it's a little easier now than it was 15 years ago. To build something good, to have some rest there. And that's that's true of our lives and our families, of the world around us. When we're unrighteous, it makes it harder for everyone else to find rest. But the good news is, even when we are incomplete in our faithfulness to the Lord, we can get back on those tracks. He's calling us. He's inviting us. He's
faithful and just to forgive our sins.
My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Come to me and find rest for those who are weary, and he's willing to help you with that work. Yeah. Well, David, I think that's probably a pretty good place to land the plane. Thanks for bringing us through Joshua
is good.
Helping us to.
This Sunday, we're kicking off Easter season.
Easter.
We're going straight to Jesus.
It's a big Easter.
Transfiguration of Jesus.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Well, thank you guys for hanging with us. Thanks for being a part of our church. If you're part of our church, thanks for being a part of the church. If you're part of the church, and if you're not, thanks for listening. Hopefully the Lord is tugging on your heart. And if that is you, you're always welcome to send any of us at Living Streams an email. We'd love to talk with you. And
Alec loves emails.
Yeah, I love email. I love those kind of emails. If you want to know Jesus, I'll take that email. I'll ignore all the boring ones and get right to yours. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you on Sunday.
And if you want to get baptized, we're doing baptisms Easter.
Oh, baptisms on Easter.
Livingstreams.org. You can register for that, get more information.
That's true. I'm going to be doing the Duncan, so it'll look like
an internship. If you've been listening, you want to be an intern this summer?
Yeah, we'll take it. Plugging all the things.
Bam.
David's plugging all the things I'm supposed to be plugging. Anyway, thank you guys so much. We'll see you later.